Welcome back to the Urban Ranch version 2.0, episode 16. Well, just like any project, it's only as good as the foundation upon which it's built. And we've spent a lot of time thus far in our previous episodes focusing on a lot of the structural work in the first, second, and third floors. Today's episode, we're going to take a closer look at the basement of the Urban Ranch. Again, we need to appreciate that the home, when it was built in 1913, was originally a two-sided home. You can see here we're looking at the side of the home that Crystal and I lived on, with the stone wall still retained in the middle portion of the home, in this portion of the basement. Although you'll see here in just a second that the other part of the home, where those two pieces of steel posts are on the right hand side of your screen, there used to be the stone wall continued there. That has obviously now been removed and being held up by those new pieces of steel. What we're also noticing here is that there's a lot of work actually going into the floor of the basement. We'll talk about that a little bit more specifically here. One common feature of German village homes tends to be water in basements. Now, fortunately, that has not been a significant issue for our home in the past. That being said, if there was a good heavy rain, the wall, specifically here on the left of your screen, would have some water kind of seep through it. And on the other side of the home, they too would get some water. So we want to be very cognizant, if we're going to go through all the time and effort on this project, to make sure that we don't run into water or vapor issues in the future. Therefore, we worked with Gary Mays, our building envelope engineer, to come up with a solution and plan to address those concerns. As you may recall from previous videos, we began by addressing the potential water issues in the future by laying in drain tile throughout the perimeter of the basement walls. That hopefully any water that were to in the future drain down through the exterior walls will be captured in our drain tile and then run out outside to the exterior of the building. You may also recall that in previous videos we've discussed how the HVAC system for the house was going to include radiant floor heating. That includes the basement. Now, while the first, second, and third floors will have formal panels that are laid down with aluminum grooves that the radiant tubing will sit in, the basement is a little bit different. Again, because this is going to be a concrete floor, this, as you're looking at here, is actually the radiant tubing that'll go underneath the concrete. And we'll talk about that a little bit more specifically here in just a minute. Now, while the heating of the house will be provided through the radiant system, we do have to be cognizant of air conditioning, and therefore we'll have air handlers providing air conditioning throughout the home, air handlers dedicated for each floor. That being said, in this climate, if you're going ahead and putting an air handler in, adding to that a heat pump for possible additional need for backup heat in the future seemed like a worthwhile venture, and so we'll be adding heat pumps to each of those air handlers as well. You can see again in this view here the differentiation between the two sides of the basement and that remaining stone wall in the middle. That didn't need to be removed. Just as the layout of the basement didn't really necessitate that, and also saved on any additional structural concerns from the basement perspective. Or what is this here? Looks like we have a little amateur video being shot. Alright, well, here we're on site at the Urban Ranch version 2.0 in the basement. We have a lot of work that's gone on over the past few days. Well, I'll take your attention down to the floor here. Most floors in basements, I don't know that they go through this level of detail that we have, but our building envelope engineer has really made some great specifications for us to ensure a lot of issues that may come up in the future hopefully don't. Can't obviously guarantee it, but we're making some measures to hopefully to prevent, most notably, water intrusion into the basement. So to start with, what you may have seen, I think from previous videos on the floor, was after we dug down, we poured new footers for the concrete, for our steel support posts and that. We then put down a layer of gravel, and then on top of that gravel is this blue plastic membrane. That's a 15 mil plastic. It's very thick and hopefully impenetrable to the stone that was put down, that was tamped down. All of the seams in the vapor barrier, the blue vapor barrier, are all taped per the recommendations of our engineering team. And then on top of that, so that's for the vapor barrier, and you'll see that that vapor barrier over here on this side actually comes up onto the brick foundation wall. On top of that then goes 2 inches of a rigid foam, and this is really to help with insulation purposes, because as you'll see on top of it, we have a mesh network of steel that's going to help reinforce the concrete that's going to be poured tomorrow. But then you also see a bunch of tubing. This tubing is the beginning of the radiant floor heating that we're putting throughout the house. And that's really why we have some of that insulation down below. Most folks think of heat as rising, which it typically does, but what we don't want to do is lose any of our heat down into the earth below the home. So that's why we have this foam here to help insulate our radiant tubing, so that all of this concrete pad down here will then be insulated as well. We'll then, as you'll see along those far walls, not only have that vapor barrier come up that wall, but then we'll spray foam directly onto that, and that'll then create the vapor barrier between both on the new concrete piers that we have. They're supporting the huge moment frame above. This is where that pier is. That was the back of the old house. So that's the new addition. We're in the old home as we are here. But that spray foam will also then create that vapor barrier with the original stone foundation wall. You also see we have some conduit sticking up here. That conduit's been run, that goes out outside and up for future needs for the yard and the barn and all that we have going on up there. So just kind of future planning there. So a lot going on. Again, this is a lot of the work that at the end of the project, you'll never see. You'll never know that it was done unless you do know that it was done. So really happy with the way the guys have done this. Just fantastic thus far. Tomorrow's a big day with the concrete coming. And the concrete itself is going to be a polished concrete. Crystal and I have selected a particular dye that'll go into the concrete to add a little color to it, as well as a stone aggregate that when the concrete is then polished, you'll actually see some of that aggregate in the finished product. So we're looking forward to that down the road. So as I've said multiple times before, more to come. And again, hope you're enjoying the progress on the UrbanRanch version 2.0. So here we are now on day with concrete's being poured. You can see the guys working in the basement here. You also see how the concrete is coming in. It's a relatively large pour, 2 truckloads worth of concrete that, again, we have had a dye added to tint the color. And so what we've gone with, instead of by wheelbarrows bringing that in, we're actually using a concrete pump. You can see the gentleman here with Buckeye Ready Mix loading in from one truck into the hopper, and then a series of hoses coming down actually through one of the basement windows to get the concrete in. You can see this is the kind of layout of the day, and you really get a view from here, the 2 sides to the basement. Again, Crystal and I, having previously lived on the left side of the screen here, and our tenants previously lived on the right. You can see the frame, the mock-up of the elevator shaft there on the right, and you can see we're protecting that from concrete, as the pit of that actually only needs to be about 4 inches, which is relatively shallow for an elevator pit. You can see here on a different angle, the guy's actually pulling that concrete, and you can see Benson, a gentleman in the white shirt with HK Motor on the back, in this screen, and he's holding up a post with a laser level connected to it. He's going over to the right side of the screen here, and that'll beep when he's holding that at the proper height from a set point that they have already determined on the far east of the property. And that's how the guys make sure that that concrete is level throughout the entire pour, given such the large span that we're doing all in one pour here today. You can also see everybody's working hard, or actually, well, maybe not working too hard. You always need to have supervisors. Just kidding with you guys. Everybody worked really hard on this day. A concrete pour like this is a very timed event, and everybody really stepped up their game to make sure that the concrete pour went smoothly and we didn't encounter any issues. Again, very sequential job and pour. You can see how they kind of have moved themselves around the basement, getting themselves out. Now, once the concrete is poured, then they allow it to sit for about an hour, hour and a half, and then through a series of maneuvers, the guys go down, and I mean, they move at, again, remarkable, breathtaking speed. And what they're doing is they're smoothing that concrete out. The more times that they go over this concrete, allowing it to kind of settle a little bit more in between each, really provides an ultra smooth finish to that floor. Now again, this is just a rough finish still. We'll come back in the next few weeks after the concrete's had plenty of time to cure. We'll then plan to grind that concrete surface down. Typically we're shooting for about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch that we'll grind down, and what that'll do is it'll expose some of that aggregate that Crystal and I had selected for the floor. It'll provide a ultra smooth finish to the floor, but also with a little bit of depth to it, with the aggregate being more exposed. So I'll allow you kind of watch the guys go through this finishing process, if you will. And again, yet at their breathtaking speed. Reminds me of the old days when you'd be at a roller rink. The guys just did a fantastic job with this pour that day. You can see here kind of that finish on the floor, and you can see how smooth that is by the end of the day. Now, after the pour is completed, we let that sit overnight, and the next day then we're going to want to come back and make sure that we prevent any undue cracks from happening in the floor. Now, we know that the concrete may likely crack in the future. It's a constant drying process, and you can see here, this is now on Saturday morning. We determine where those cuts are going to be made in the concrete. Lines are snapped and then literally gone through and cutting those grooves in the concrete floor to help mitigate and direct the potential cracks that the concrete may do in the future. So again, we've all learned a lot of lessons throughout this entire process of the basement, and none more so than how not to ever lose your boots. And Benson, the owner of B7 Construction, shows us the best way to do that is be the guy with the pink boots. Nobody's going to steal those. Just kidding with you, Benson. So again, hope everybody's enjoying these. Urban Ranch version 2.0, more to come.